Welcome to another lecture video in Science for Grade 10. Still, we are on the topic plate tectonics. Now, we will learn about the different processes that occur along plate boundaries. And at the end of this presentation, you should be able to explain the different processes that occur along plate boundaries. Just a fair use disclaimer. Borrowed materials included in this presentation are owned by their respective copyright holders and are used here for educational purposes only, such as teaching, copies for classroom use, and research. We learned that there are three basic types of movements which occur in plate boundaries: convergent, divergent, and lateral slipping. And accounted on these three basic types are the different processes, such as colliding, subducting, spreading, and slipping. Each of these movements contributes to the formation of new landforms on the crust, along with the other natural occurrences such as volcanism, weathering, erosion, and the like. Since different landforms are known to form onto the Earth's crust, it is important to describe this layer of the Earth. The crust is the outermost layer of the Earth where all organisms live. It is made up of the continents and the ocean floor. It is made up of solid rocks such as sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous. It has the average density of 2.8 grams per cubic centimeter, and its thickness ranges from 5 to 50 kilometers. It is thicker in the continents where relatively young mountain is present, and it is thinner into the ocean floor. The Earth's crust is divided into two: the continental crust and the oceanic crust. But how are these two different from each other? The difference between continental crust and oceanic crust may be accounted to the density and to the rock composition. The continental crust is thick, less dense than oceanic crust, and mostly old. It is about 25 miles or 32 kilometers thick under the continents and composed of granite, whereas oceanic crust is thin, dense, sinks under continental crust, and young. It is about 3 to 5 miles or 8 kilometers thick under the oceans, and it is composed of basalt. Now, let us discuss the different types of plate boundaries and the processes that occur onto each, with respect to the different types of crust, such as continental crust and oceanic crust. The first one is oceanic continental convergent plate boundary. What will happen when oceanic crust and continental crust collide? The denser oceanic crust undergoes subduction. Subduction is the bending of the crust towards the mantle. And since mantle is hotter than the crust, the subducted crust melts, forming magma. The subduction of plate can cause earthquakes at varying depths. What landforms will be formed after? Trench, which is a submarine valley, is formed at oceanic crust. Also, trenches are described as the deepest part of the oceans. Moreover, this type of plate boundary gives rise to the formation of volcanic arc near the edge of a continental plate. One of the notable examples of oceanic continental convergent plate boundary is the convergence of Nazca plate, which is an oceanic crust, and South American plate, which is a continental crust. This gives rise to the formation of Peru Chile Trench and Andes Mountains. How about oceanic convergent plate boundary? When two oceanic plates collide, subduction occurs. If subduction happens between two oceanic plates, the younger, less dense plate goes on top, while the denser, older plate subducts. The subduction of plate can cause earthquakes at varying depths. The subducted layer slides into the asthenosphere and becomes magma. And when the time comes that magma rises and breaks into the surface, lava piles up and forms volcanic island arcs. Volcanic island arcs are chains of volcanoes aligned in an arc shape. Also, it forms trenches, which become the source of underwater earthquakes in the form of tsunami. Many parts of the Philippine archipelago originated from oceanic convergence. As seen from the picture, Philippine Islands are formed as the Philippine Sea Plate subducts beneath the Eurasian Plate. In relation to that, majority of the islands in the Philippine archipelago are considered part of the Philippine Mobile Belt. How about the Philippine Trench and the East Luzon Trench? How are these topographic features formed? The oceanic Philippine Sea Plate subducts under the Philippine Mobile Belt, forming the Philippine Trench and the East Luzon Trench. There are other trenches and volcanic island arcs in the world which are products of oceanic convergent plate boundary. Some of those are the following: Marianas Trench, which is considered as the deepest trench in the world and is formed when Philippine Plate and Pacific Plate, both oceanic crusts, collided. These formed also the Marianas Islands and volcanic arcs. Another example is shown in the picture. The formation of the Aleutian Island arc formed when North American Plate and Pacific Plate collided. The next kind of convergent plate boundary is the continental convergent plate boundary. When two continental plates converge, a collision zone is formed. Subduction ceases, so no trench, no volcano, and no island arcs are created. What formed then? A large group of mountain ranges is created. There are many major mountain belts in the world which are product of oceanic continental plate boundary. One of those is the Himalayas mountain range, formed when two large land masses, India and Eurasia, collided. Pressure is released by pushing crusts upward and forming mountain peaks. The next type of plate boundary is the divergent plate boundary, which manifests spreading process. What happens when continental divergent plate boundary occurs? When a spreading center develops within a continent, the crust may break into several segments. The breaking leads to the formation of faulted valleys called reef valleys. It is also associated with the rising of hot materials from the mantle. How about oceanic divergent plate boundary? When divergence happens in the seafloor, a gap is formed in the plate boundary where magma or hot molten materials go up. The upwelling of molten materials forms underwater mountain ranges called oceanic ridges. As the plates continue to separate, new materials from the mantle ooze off to fill the gap. These materials will slowly cool to produce the new ocean floor. Divergence ensures a continuous supply of new materials from the mantle, as well as the formation of the new ocean floor. Divergent plate boundary movement comes in stages. Presented in the slide is the sequence of forming reefs and ridges in divergent plate boundary. This starts with the upwarping of two continental plates due to the continuous movement of molten materials in the Earth's asthenosphere, forming plateau, an area of relatively level high ground. Example, Colorado Plateau. As spreading continues, a reef valley, which is a lowland region found both on land and at the bottom of the ocean, is formed. Example, African Rift Valley and Rio Grande Rift. Then spreading continues, and the Rift Valley is filled with water, forming linear sea or narrow sea. Example, Red Sea. As divergence continues to separate the plates, narrow sea will then become ocean. The driving force underneath continues, making the molten materials to ooze up. As the divergence happens in the ocean crust and material starts to rise, new ocean floor is formed. It gives rise to mid-ocean ridges, which are seafloor mountain systems formed by plate tectonics. Example, Mid-Atlantic Ridge found in Atlantic Ocean. The last type of plate boundary is the transform fault plate boundary. This is also called slipping boundary, in which the edges of two plates slide past each other in opposite direction. However, friction along the boundary of the plates prevents the edges to easily slide past each other. As transform fault plate boundary movement occurs, pressure is built, causing the landmass to break and slip. This generates strong earthquakes. No major effect in topography and no volcanic activity is expected. The effect is described as conservative, which indicates that the lithosphere is neither destroyed nor created. As seen from the picture, there are two oceanic ridge segments on which divergent plate boundary movement happens. And as the transform fault plate boundary movement occurs, this connects two ridge segments together. One of the notable examples of transform fault plate boundary is seen in the picture. This is the San Andreas Fault in California. This is formed when Pacific Plate and North American Plate slide past each other. We learned that most tectonic activities such as earthquake, mountain formations, and volcanic activities happen along the plate boundaries. But there are cases in which activities such as volcanism takes place in the middle of the plate. And that is true upon the formation of volcanic island chains due to hotspot. Hotspot refers to an area in the mantle which heat rises as a thermal plume from deep in the earth. Scientists suggested that there is a source of molten materials from the mantle called mantle plume that form the volcanic island chains. Mantle plumes are stationary, long-lived areas of hot, upwelling mantle. The superficial expression of mantle plume is the hotspot. The idea about hotspots started when extensive mapping of seafloor volcanoes in the Pacific revealed a chain of volcanic structures extending from the Hawaiian Islands to Midway Islands. As the Pacific plate moves, different parts of it will be on the top of the mantle plume to receive the molten materials, thus creating the volcanic islands. When geologists determined the age of each volcanic island through radiometric dating, they noticed that the farther the volcano from Hawaii is, the older and less active it is. As the plate continues to move, it eventually carries the volcanic island beyond the hotspot, cutting it off from the magma source, and volcanism ceases. As seen from the picture, the volcanic island that is directly on top of the hotspot is the most active one, while the volcanoes which are farther from the hotspot due to plate movement are less active, becoming eroded volcanic islands and later on seamounts. And here are the relevant references which were used to make the slide presentation. Thank you, and see you again next time to the next lecture video in Science for Grade 10.